Welcome to the Secondary Writing webinar, The Power of Writing. This is the second webinar in the Secondary Writing series and is designed to help teachers get a great start to the writing process, specifically with the steps of pre-writing to drafting, while also providing some effective writing strategies. This webinar will not only give some steps to help get students started in the writing process, but will also give some concrete examples that can be used again at the secondary level. Before we get started on the details, let's take a look again at the overview of the writing process. This diagram, which we viewed in the first webinar, is a clear example of the recursive nature of the writing process. Too often, the process is presented as a linear lockstep process, which violates the very nature of writing. Reading and writing are reciprocal processes, each developing fluency in the other. Keep in mind the responding piece here. Students need feedback. That feedback can be formal or informal, lengthy or brief. However you provide it, keep in mind that students need that feedback to gain confidence in writing. By adding this step in more complex writings, time will actually be saved when you redirect students before they are finished. A common complaint of secondary students is that the teacher bled red all over the paper after they poured so much into it. By having some of these conversations before and during the process, it makes it much easier for them. So now that we are all on the same page, let's now take a look at the importance of pre-writing. Some people question the importance of pre-writing, especially at the secondary level. It seems babyish to some. To me, it is critical. Let me give you this analogy. You are getting ready to go on a trip. What is important? Where are you going? What will you pack? Do you know the best way to get there? These are important questions to ask before you leave. If you don't figure these things out, it could be a recipe for disaster. The same thing goes for writing. Pre-writing gives students a roadmap for their writing. It tells them where they are going, the purpose, who is important and what is important to pack or include, the intended audience, and what their goal is and the best way to get there, the type of writing or the prompt they're going to write. This pre-writing roadmap helps writers develop and organize ideas that give them the best way to get there. There are a variety of pre-writing techniques. Some of the more popular pre-writing techniques include free writing, brainstorming, clustering or mapping, asking questions, making lists, and drawing. Each writer must find the one or ones that works best for him or her. We will discuss these more in depth later in this webinar. However, keep in mind, not all trips that we take require this much planning. The same can be said for writing, so there may be times that a quick write may be fine for your students. However, no matter how long the trip, the writing process with the students will be strengthened by showing students the strategies and how to plan for success. During pre-writing, the writer makes the most important decisions about his or her writing, choosing a topic, determining the purpose, identifying the audience, and beginning to develop and organize ideas. Pre-writing truly begins with knowing what to write about when you begin really writing your draft. There are many ways we can provide this information to students. As we continue to talk about how students write every day, the prompt and purpose become very important. Understanding the prompt is one issue seen with many writers from elementary all the way up to college. This can be seen several ways, such as choosing the topic, which is when students have free rein to write about anything of their choosing, or understanding the prompt, where they must read and ascertain what they are being asked to do in the writing prompt. Choosing the topic basically is where we tell students to write what you know. Like the cartoon on this slide, many students are told to write what they know. However, they don't think they know anything worth writing about. They think that their lives are not exciting enough or important enough to write about. What you know isn't just what you see around you. It's not only the life you have lived so far. You know a lot more than that. You know what frightens you. You know how you feel when you're afraid. You can draw upon these feelings to make your stories believable to others. Your fear of the dark places, of the unknown, of pain and death, as well as love, happiness, sadness, anger, the full range of emotions common to all of us. And don't forget the other thing that you know, the people around you, the people you have known in the past. Details about these people will also make your stories or characters come alive to your readers. We want students to take what they know and put it in their writing, but they will need direction. Secondary students will be able to develop from write what you know, but scaffolding definitely will be required. Let's move on to understanding the prompt. One of the most common issues with writing is ensuring that the prompt is answered. Students must be taught to analyze a prompt so they can ensure they answer what is being asked. Students need to address the following questions before they start writing. What does the prompt say? You can even have beginning students underline the important parts and enumerate what they need to answer. What type of writing is required? What is the purpose? What information do I need? What kind of details or arguments does the writing prompt suggest, and would these points make good paragraphs? Who is the intended audience? We often hear with secondary students, why do I need to know this? Which basically means, how does this impact my future? One way to really make this hit home is motivation and audience awareness. Tie student writing back to authenticity and relevance. Has your school had a bond election? How did writing impact decisions made? How do you show students how to get on the right road in regards to writing? Ask them, what is your motivation? What do you need the audience to know? Writing is everywhere. We write to keep records of events or information, to make sense of something, or to shape a new idea. We write to prove what we've learned in school and to summarize the things we read. We write to explain and help readers understand difficult concepts. We write to analyze, to theorize, and to entertain our readers. Knowing the purpose of the writing determines not only the type of writing you do, but also the audience you are writing for. Knowing those two things determines how the writing is developed and organized. Motivation and audience awareness are key components to getting and staying on the right road. Just a reminder, nothing motivates students more than having an authentic audience. This is especially true when it comes to students who may not see college as an option. They may question the usefulness of writing. When students know that their writing has a real purpose in the world, they care about their writing and they work harder at the craft of writing. The reality is that competence builds confidence, and when students become better writers, they want to write. They become better writers through daily instruction, practice, and feedback. While information on the developmental sequence of organizing skills is sketchy, anecdotal information suggests that people follow this rough sequence. 1, they sort into categories. 2, they structure the categories into a specific order for best communication, using criteria such as which item will work best to catch readers' attention in the opening. 3, within a category, sequence information into a specific order for best communication, using criteria such as what will best persuade an audience. And keep in mind at each of these levels, it's important that student writers discuss their decisions. They should understand that categories for a certain topic could be structured in several different ways. And the fourth thing, or final skill acquired, is the ability to omit information that is not needed in order to communicate effectively. This is rough for secondary students, especially when a paper has to be a certain length. In your classroom, what importance is placed on the organization and relevance to the piece of writing? And speaking of relevance, contrary to popular belief, it still helps some students at the secondary level to use some type of organizational tool, such as a graphic organizer. For secondary writers to feel motivated to stay organized when writing, I want you to consider the 3 R's: relevance, rigor, and realistic. These 3 R's help both students and teachers make the roadmap to writing a little smoother. Let's look at each of these 3 in more depth. Relevance means that the student is able to have some connection to the task. It could be something they are familiar with or just something they are interested in. It needs to have meaning of some sort for the student. For example, if a student who has lived their whole life in Miami is asked to write about the effects of a blizzard, they will have to have some research on it or be given some information since they have probably never experienced it firsthand. Again, students do not have to only write about things they know, but it will be easier for them to make connections if the topic has some relevance. One thing to consider with secondary students is that they may have developed a passion. This passion, as well as scaffolding the way that writing relates in the real world, helps students make those connections. The second R stands for rigor. Rigorous means that the student has to think. Writing easily lends itself to the task with rigor. I really love this acronym for ways to increase rigor. R stands for raise the level of content. I, increase the complexity. G, give appropriate support and guidance. O, open your focus. And R, raise those expectations. Remember that oftentimes the task of writing can easily lend itself to rigor, especially when it is to an authentic audience and includes a real-world connection that students find relevant and worthy. And the third R stands for realistic. And realistic is just that, being real about expectations of students and time frames. Writing must be able to be done by the students in the time frame with the information they have. Time is always an issue in school. It's often difficult to find time every day. So ensure that students have the time to devote to the type of writing they will be doing. For example, it would be difficult for students to complete a research paper in 3 class periods. One other big issue is realistic in regards to the student's level of maturity and preparation. Even though students should be able to independently do a task, does not mean that they can. Scaffolding needs to be used with students to support them to write. Scaffolding can take place through vocabulary interventions, modeling the pre-writing, and so on. As we continue learning about the writing process, it becomes evident that starting off strong is the key to success. With a solid and successful pre-writing experience, students will find the writing process to be a little smoother. Initially, students just begin getting ideas on paper in a rough form, not being burdened by all the conventions of writing expected in final drafts. During the drafting stage of writing, a student develops a more cohesive text and explores his or her topic, directed by purpose, audience, genre, and content. Drafting helps students expand upon, clarify, and modify their initial plans and ideas, and it helps them organize their content into a meaningful sequence or flow. It's also helpful to provide students with explicit instruction on how to transform ideas and notes into strong sentences and paragraphs. Strategies might include color-coding sample words and phrases that can be combined into sentences, modeling sentence combining, and teaching students to use transition words. Show students how to write different types of sentences, paragraphs, and other draft text for different purposes and audiences. Writing is a skill that definitely is key to ensuring future success for students. We live in an instant generation where that wants what it wants and it wants it now. That makes it increasingly difficult to encourage students to take the time needed to make drafts. The second part of this webinar will focus on creating better writers and providing students effective writing strategies for improvement. These skills will need to be explicitly taught to ensure understanding, retention, and fidelity. The first writing strategy is to explicitly teach students strategies for planning, revising, and editing their written products. This may involve teaching general processes like brainstorming or editing, or more specific elements such as steps for writing a persuasive essay. In either case, it is recommended that teachers model the strategy, provide assistance as students practice using the strategy on their own, and allow for independent practice with the strategy once they have learned it. Secondary students may need some modeling, especially for strategies they are not familiar with. Just a reminder to not take for granted that students know something because they should. The second writing strategy is the summarizing text. Summarizing text explicitly teaches students procedures for summarizing what they have read. Summarization allows students to practice concise, clear writing to convey an accurate message of the main ideas in a text. Teaching summary writing can involve strategies for producing effective summaries or gradual fading of models of a good summary as students become more proficient with the skill. Summarization is one of the hardest skills for students, but it is often required in college classes and in technical settings. Strategy 3 is collaborative writing. Collaborative writing is when you allow students to work together to plan, write, edit, and revise their writing. It's recommended that teachers provide a structure for cooperative writing and clear expectations for individual performance within their cooperative groups or partnerships. For example, If the class is working on using descriptive adjectives in their compositions, one student could be assigned to review another's writing. He or she could provide positive feedback, noting several instances of using descriptive vocabulary, and provide constructive feedback, identifying several sentences that could be enhanced with additional adjectives. After this, the students could switch roles and repeat the process. Peer editing is a valuable tool that can be used to greatly enhance writing, especially at the secondary level. Even as teachers, do you have a peer edit your writing that will be seen by others? Especially if it's going to go home to parents or someone who is unfamiliar with the educational terms? Talk about an authentic audience. Ensure students know and understand that this is a real-life situation and skill. The fourth strategy is to have students set goals. These goals set specific milestones for the writing assignments that students are to complete. The goals can be established by the teacher or created by the whole class themselves, of course with the review of the teacher to ensure that they are appropriate and attainable. The goals can include, but are not limited to, adding more ideas to a paper, or including specific elements of a writing genre, such as in an opinion essay, include at least 3 reasons supporting your belief. Setting specific product goals can foster motivation, and teachers can continue to motivate students by providing reinforcement when they reach each milestone. Sentence combining is the 5th strategy for teaching effective writing. Sentence combining teaches students to write more complex and sophisticated sentences, and it involves teachers' modeling of how to combine 2 or more related sentences to create a more complex one. Students should be encouraged to apply the sentence construction skills as they write or revise. This can be a fun classroom activity and ties into the collaboration for secondary students. One activity to work on this is super sentences. Students work to create sophisticated sentences, and then the groups rate sentences, just like they do on the television shows like Dancing with the Stars. One key to using this with modeling is ensuring transference to the actual writing, and using a rubric with this area is an effective way to help reinforce this strategy. The 6th strategy involves process writing. Process writing means implementing flexible but practical classroom routines that provide students with extended opportunities for practicing the cycle of planning, writing, and reviewing their compositions. The process approach also involves writing for authentic audiences, personal responsibility for written work, student-to-student interactions throughout the writing process, and self-evaluation of writing. The 7th strategy centers on inquiry. Teachers can set writing assignments that require use of inquiry skills. Successful inquiring activities include establishing a clear goal for writing, for example, writing about a conflict on the playground, examination of concrete data using specific strategies, and translation of what was learned into 1 or more compositions. Authentic inquiry is key to student ownership of their learning. In webinar 5 of this series, we will discuss some cross-curricular content writing, which is another way for students to use inquiry. The 8th strategy is pre-writing. As discussed earlier in this webinar, secondary teachers need to engage students in activities prior to writing that help them produce and organize their ideas. Pre-writing can involve tasks that encourage students to access what they already know, complete research about a topic they are not familiar with, or arrange their ideas visually using a graphic organizer before writing. And the last strategy to help students become successful writers is to be the model. Teacher modeling provides students with examples of the type of writing they are expected to produce. You should analyze the models with your class and encourage students to imitate in their own writing the critical and effective elements that you show. In future webinars, we will discuss types of writing and what is expected. Students need to see what is expected so that they can replicate and ensure they meet all of the requirements. So here's an overview of the writing strategies that we just reviewed. I want you to carefully think about your students and which strategies you might use with them. Evidence-based practices for teaching writing include teaching strategies for planning, revising, and editing, having students write summaries of text, permitting students to write collaboratively with peers, setting goals for student writing, teaching sentence combining skills, using the process writing approach, having students participate in inquiry activities for writing, involving students in pre-writing activities, and providing models of good writing. Do you see gaps in your teaching? Are you teaching these strategies explicitly? Though this list is a pretty comprehensive list, it is not all-encompassing. There are some ways you might be able to integrate or cluster some of these strategies together after students have learned. Let's look again. Time is needed. With any combination of teaching strategies a teacher chooses to use, students must be given ample time to write. Writing cannot be a subject that is shortchanged or glossed over due to time constraints. Moreover, for weaker writers, additional time, individualized support, and explicit teaching of transcription skills, handwriting, spelling, or typing may be necessary. Self-regulation skills. For all students, teachers should promote the development of self-regulation skills. Having students set goals for their writing and learning, monitoring and evaluating their success in meeting these goals, and self-reinforcing their learning and writing efforts puts them in charge, increasing independence and efficacy. Differentiated evidence-based practices. You have to supplement your current writing practices and curricula with a combination of evidence-based practices that best meets the needs of your students. Just a note, no single strategy for teaching writing will prove effective for all students. Furthermore, the provided strategies do not constitute a writing curriculum. Teachers should aim to supplement their current writing practices and curricula with a mix of all the evidence-based writing practices we shared. The optimal mixture of practices should be tailored to best meet the writing needs of the class, as well as the needs of individual students. It's especially important to monitor the success of each technique implemented to be sure that it is working as intended and to make adjustments as needed. I hope you enjoyed today's writing webinar on pre-writing and explicitly teaching effective writing strategies to your students. 3 key things to remember. Even some secondary students need scaffolding. Just because students should have those skills doesn't mean that they do. Pre-writing and planning are key components to the writing process, not just one more thing to do. Priority and importance must be placed on them to help students better prepare for writing. It needs to be more than a box checked. Reiterate to students that the more time they spend ensuring their paper is well thought out, the easier the actual writing will be. And effective writing strategies can help students put structures into place to build their writing capabilities. Writing truly is power in our world, and as we continue this webinar series, we plan to give our students more power in their world and their future.